The G7 summit concluded today in Hiroshima in Japan. Amid a string of bilaterals held on the sidelines with countries vowing to toughen sanctions on Russia, pledging unwavering support to Kiev, one country that did not miss the mention is China. United States President Joe Biden said that relations between Washington and Beijing are set to improve shortly.
Should have an open hotline. At the Bali conference, that's what the President Xi and I agreed we were going to do and meet on. And then this silly balloon that was carrying 2 freight cars worth of spine equipment was flying over the United States, and it got shot down, and everything changed in terms of talking to one another. I think you're going to see that begin to thaw very shortly.
Now, this comes at a time when the relationship between the two nations has been icy for several reasons, ranging from multiple suspected Chinese spy balloons entering Washington's airspace to militarization of the South China Sea and Beijing's increasingly coercive behavior towards Taiwan as well. US President also reiterated that his country is maintaining the one China policy approach towards Taiwan, a self-ruled island that China claims to be part of its own territory. However, he also added that Washington will continue to help Taiwan to be in a position where they can defend themselves. In addition to this, the industrialized nation of the world also agreed to reduce dependence on Beijing. They called for diversifying supply chains to stop being reliant on one country. Biden emphasized that the G7 members are not looking to decouple, but rather de-risk economic engagement with China.
Now, we're also united in our approach to the People's Republic of China. And the joint statement released yesterday outlines the shared principles we've all agreed to at the G7 and beyond in dealing with China. We're not looking to decouple from China. We're looking to de-risk and diversify our relationship with China.
Now, Biden reiterated that the United States and G7 allies would not trade in materials that would allow China to build weapons of mass destruction. The joint statement prompted China's embassy in Japan to urge the G7 to stop creating confrontation and division. All right, for more on this, joining us live from Croatia, we have foreign policy analyst Edward Joseph. He is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you very much.
So, trade between the US and China hit a record high last year at over $690 billion. Is the US even capable of decoupling from China?
Well, we've seen from President Biden's statement that the U.S. is not trying to decouple. The approach that the U.S. and its G7 partners and its close allies in Europe for some time now has been to de-risk. That is to mitigate the exposure to aspects of the relationship in which China could exploit. So from the supply side, the G7 countries do not want to be providing China with materials that could increase China's ability to threaten its neighbors. And at the same time, they want to build up their own supply chains independent of China so that they're not dependent on strategic materials from China. So that's the approach. The idea here, what's important here, it's not just about words. It's about taking the steps that are plausible, that steps to so the risk goes down with China, but avoid playing into China's hands by making provocative steps or issuing provocative statements. And that's why they deliberately came together here. There's very good, strong unity among the G7, but there's an attempt here led by the United States to prevent China from exploiting this and seeing this all as provocative. Please.
Edward, Biden had said that de-risking and diversification, I mean, these are the key terms that came out from his speech. They're needed so the U.S. is not dependent on any one nation. Now, no points for guessing which nation they're essentially referring to. The fact that U.S.-China trade has surged in spite of dwindling diplomatic ties, does it reflect America's acute dependency on China?
I don't think so. The U.S. is not dependent on China for crucial materials like, for example, semiconductors. The U.S. gets those mainly from Taiwan, and indeed China mainly gets them from Taiwan. So for strategic materials, it's not. But let's face it, the relationship between China and the United States is economically interdependent. Each depends on the other. So it's not necessarily in the realm of strategic materials, but it's in the vast enormity of the relationship, the sheer amount of trade between the two countries that shows that neither country, the United States nor China, really has an interest to disrupt that relationship. But the U.S. is very concerned about China's provocative actions, its aggressive posture in Asia, its increasing threats that it poses to its neighbors, and the U.S. is determined to work with G7 partners to send a signal back that there's unity among the G7 about the de-risking. And we see, of course, the reaction here, the immediate reaction from China after this G7 statement, which was, despite this toning down of the rhetoric, China has ratcheted it back up and accuses the G7, led by the U.S., of wanting to go for confrontation. So we see that China is attempting to characterize all of this as menacing, while the U.S. is working with the G7 to present this as simply a prudent step to avoid being exposed to too much risk to China. Please.
Thank you so much for joining in on the broadcast, sir. That was your perspective. We're happy to hear it. That was Edward Joseph joining us from Croatia.
Welcome.